Hi, I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, host of Highly Sensitive Money. I'm a money coach, certified financial planner, and a highly sensitive person who brings money and social justice together. If you're someone who feels deeply, can endlessly think through how one decision affects everything else, or has ever struggled with all the things that traditional financial thinking leaves out, you're in the right place. In this show, I chat with highly sensitive people on how they handle their money, and with money experts on how they cultivate social justice in their work. Questions? Please go to allthecolors.net and schedule a free 30-minute call. And I'm happy to share resources on investment management, money coaching, workshops, or anything else money and social justice related. Join us in this episode as we explore money and sensitivity while honoring that all of our well-being is interconnected. In this episode, I sit down with Amy Pinnell, a registered social worker and clinical therapist who specializes in working with highly sensitive helpers and healers. We explore the challenges that sensitive people face in caregiving professions, from the paradox of being naturally gifted at helping while being more susceptible to burnout, to the limiting financial stories that are pushed onto people in caregiving positions. Amy shares her own journey from burning out 9 months into her first social work role to building a sustainable practice that honors her sensitivity. We discuss practical strategies for burnout prevention and recovery, the importance of emotional boundaries, and why advocating for fair compensation is key to helping sensitive caregivers prevent burnout. Welcome, Amy, to Highly Sensitive Money. I am thrilled to have you here. You're going to be like my third social worker. I think as someone who also was briefly a social worker, I feel like there's a lot of highly sensitives in the social working space. But thank you so much for being here. It's a joy to get to interview you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. And yeah, a fellow social worker. I love it.
And to start, I would love for you to introduce yourself, your work that you do today, and how it is that you arrived at it.
Sure. So my name's Amy Pinnell, and I'm a registered social worker and a clinical therapist. I currently live and work in Nova Scotia, Canada, but I'm also registered in British Columbia, which is the opposite coast of Canada. And right now I wear quite a few hats. So as a clinical therapist, I work in the public sector. So I work part-time as a clinical therapist working with moderate to severe mental health issues. So folks diagnosed with the DSM who come into our provincial health authority. So people come in and they receive those services for free, and they have to meet criteria. They have to have moderate to severe mental health concerns. And most of my folks that I work with struggle with anxiety disorders, depression, PTSD, or substance use disorders. And then part-time, so I do one-on-one therapy, I do assessments, one-on-one therapy in groups through that role. And then I also have a private practice where I work as a clinical therapist just privately. And in that role, I've been able to really niche down into a population I'm really passionate and love working with, which is highly sensitive helpers and healers. So in that role, I work with a range of helping professionals, a lot of healthcare workers, nurses, but also veterinarians, teachers, fellow social workers, fellow therapists, all folks who have this highly sensitive temperament trait, highly empathetic people who found themselves in helping roles. And our focus is often around burnout prevention or burnout recovery, or working around codependency, perfectionism, things like that, so that they can keep doing the work they love without burning themselves out. And then on top of that, I have my side business, Sensitive Social Worker, where I specialize. It's branching out to, again, include more variety of helping professionals, but it really just started out as an Instagram account where I just shared some of my thoughts as a highly sensitive social worker myself. And I ended up developing some programming. So I have online courses, I do live workshops, and I sell some products. I created the Love Notes for Social Workers card deck, which I'm sold all over the world, which is pretty cool, which is just little supportive, compassionate messages for social workers, because I think that we often work really hard and we don't always get that appreciation through our day-to-day. So I want it to be that little supportive note in your back pocket. I do those kinds of 3 different things, which keeps me very busy. And obviously I need to take care of myself along the way.
And here I can give a little bit of feedback. So, yeah, and I'll just kind of repeat what you just said. So, that sounds like a lot of different things, right? You've got the very traditional social working with people who are moderately to severely have mental health concerns. Then you've got your private practice. And I love your niche of sensitive healers and caretakers, including vets, because I hadn't thought of that. But it must be really hard to be a vet and to put pets down. That's gotta be.
Veterinarians have a really hard time, and the culture is a little bit like doctors, where it's really like just push through, right? There isn't a lot of like care and support for veterinarians, and they're holding all of the pets, but then also all of the owners, right? Like kind of their emotional states and supporting them through these difficult things with their pet. And yeah, there's a lot of grief too.
And then the third side of sensitive social worker, I remember that's how I learned about your work. It was actually, so I learned about your work through Taylor Gilbert, who is another social worker who was on last year as a guest. And she immediately recommended your work. When I was looking through it, I thought, oh, this is so sweet. There's so much information on here. And we had some really good preliminary conversations to get this started. And the second part of the question is like, how did you arrive at this, what I hope is it, and does this feel like you've got like the Goldilocks feeling now with these 3 different things that you're working on?
I think I'm getting close. I definitely know that for myself, like if I'm going to be working in the public sector, it has to be part-time. And I've tried full-time, and it's just too exhausting and draining. And I find I start to lose my spark, and it's a road for burnout for me. And having something else going on where it feels like I have more autonomy, I get to make my own schedule, it really tends to my need, helps me really balance. And it's a creative outlet too. I'd say right now, I say almost is because I'd like to be able to put a little bit more in sensitive social worker than I'm currently. And I only have so many hours in a day and so much energy, but it's the closest I've probably ever felt, I would say.
Yeah.
And with just like the financial security piece too, it feels like a good balance. And to answer your question about how I got here, it was a journey. Like I did not start out planning to become a therapist. That was not my original plan. But I think like a lot of highly sensitive people, I did know that I wanted to do something that gave back. I just always knew that the work, whatever I was going to do for a profession or a career, it had to be meaningful. It had to like contribute to the world in a positive way. And so I started out actually doing an undergraduate degree in international development studies. And so I did complete that. And at the end of that degree, I realized, I don't think that's really what I want to do next. That's not really the career I want. One was the more I learned about it, the more it felt like just another kind of like branch of colonialism. Like it was just going in and telling other nationalities what to do, and that didn't sit right. And then at that point, I didn't know I was highly sensitive, but I did have the wherewithal to realize or to just reflect on how it was going to impact me, just all the change and the travel and being put in different places, different climates, different food, like all of those things. And I've had a sense that would be tough on my nervous system. And so while I was doing that degree, I worked 4 days a week to pay for my education, to pay for my housing costs. And I still came out with some debt, but that really helped me reduce that debt a lot. Like I had a lot less than some other folks I went to school with. And I worked as a caregiver for adults with intellectual disabilities. And so through that role, I met some social workers, and that kind of planted the seed of, okay, maybe I'll explore this. I took a year off, and then I moved from Nova Scotia, Canada, as far east as you can be, all the way to the West Coast, Victoria, British Columbia, to do my master's in social work. And that was the beginning of it all. I originally really wanted to work with women who experienced trauma, which now 10 years later, I'm finally, it's coming full circle where I'm able to do that because I've just been trained in EMDR and cognitive processing therapy. So I'm starting to add that into my practice. But yeah, when I moved, when I did my master's through practicum placements and then working during that degree and all the jobs I had after, I worked in homeless shelters, needle exchanges, supportive recovery houses, I worked at like a substance use clinic as a substance use counselor for a few years. And I worked in mental health intake for a few years. And I built up kind of skills and confidence and did lots more trainings, and eventually really discovered that I love this one-on-one work and the real deep healing work. So yeah, it took me the long way around. Was not the like fastest route to become a therapist, but I'm really glad I took that route. And I know from listening to your podcast, like social justice is really important to you and to this space. And that's, I think, why I always introduce myself as a social worker first, is because it's such an integral part of social work, right? It's in all the code of ethics, this pursuit of social justice. And if I hadn't had that experience in like my master's of social work and then in all those other roles that I did before becoming a therapist, I'd be coming at it from a different lens. And I'm just so glad I have that like context. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really deep context too, right? Like I can think of like needle exchange places. Those are difficult. It's difficult to work there, difficult to work in houselessness. My introduction to social work was I was volunteering at a shelter, and it's heavy work for someone who's so very sensitive, for anyone.
Yeah.
I hear that drive for meaning from the get-go and managing also your own financial needs. So then I want us to shift into the other main part of this podcast, which is money, right? Mm-hmm. And if you'd be comfortable sharing, like, what was the financial background of your childhood? And how do you see it affect the way that you work today? And I want to acknowledge that you mentioned that you worked the whole time you were in college, right? So having a lot of different responsibilities seems to have always been part of your relationship to money and financial well-being.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll start with childhood, but I think that there's a lot to be said about social work and like money. So for me, when I thought about this question, I knew you were going to ask because it's a big part of your podcast. It was hard to come up with like really specific things that like I was told or was said to me, but I just remember money being this kind of elusive thing that felt like it was like hanging over us or my family. My basic needs were always met. We were housed, we had clothing and food. I never felt like I was wanting for like my basic needs, but there was still always this sense of not having enough. And the memory that stood out to me the most was being in elementary school. And so I must have been like younger elementary, because an older elementary school student was telling me about how Santa is not real. And breaking the news to me that it's actually your parents. And I remember that I said to them, no way, that can't be true, because my parents would not be able to afford all those gifts. So at that age, even then I had this view or this belief like that, oh no, there's only so much and there's not enough to go around kind of thing. Or there's not enough for like extra. And we were okay. Like I consider us middle class. And it wasn't till through my master's I realized, okay, maybe we're lower middle class. Because I realized some people middle class looks a little bit different. Or some of my friends, they did have their parents paid for their post-secondary education. And I didn't have that luxury. They gave what they could, but overall I paid for that myself, either through debt or working. The other thing I remember is like feeling guilty about money growing up. If we were shopping and like my parents were buying something for me, I had this feeling of guilt. And again, I don't totally know exactly where that stems from. I think I'm going to be unpacking that in my own therapy soon. But yeah, I just felt bad if they were spending their money on me. And I realize now as an adult, like I can see my parents having two very different, and they're not together now, so it highlights the difference. One is like a real minimalist and doesn't like, the way of managing money is to spend as little as possible. Means you don't have to work as much if you spend less. So it's all about like less. And the other one is a lot more comfortable with like credit and debt. And so I think for me, that was what I came out with, was like, these are the options, right? You spend as little as possible or you use credit. And it's taking me a long time through my adult life to shift this and be like, there's also this option of making more money, right? Like you can find ways to make more money and then to, of course, tackle the kind of like guilt that brings up, for all those mixed feelings about what does it mean to make more money? What does it mean to have wealth? Just in terms of how it impacts me now, I can speak to that. And I think one of the ways when I noticed it the most was probably when I started doing private practice, because previously, all the work I had done, my clients were not charged for the service. When I worked in the homeless shelters and the needle exchanges and the substance use clinic, and even now in public mental health, I'm working with some really some folks with some really challenging needs, and they come in and there's no charge for them. And I do believe that like mental health care should be accessible for all. And so then going into private practice and having to set a fee and ask my clients for money, like really brought up a lot of feelings and some deep beliefs around money. And I think I still sometimes struggle with that a bit, but really over time, having clients come and like willingly, excitedly pay for my services and keep coming back has definitely helped me shift that. And I do believe that we deserve to be compensated, like that I deserve to be compensated, right? For my expertise. Most social workers and therapists have 2 degrees. We have probably paid thousands of dollars for additional training and different therapeutic modalities. We've probably written exams or had to go through like a supervisory period, paid for clinical supervision and registration, insurance, like all of these things. And what we have to offer is so important and so needed. And I really had to, I think, work on recognizing that about myself and being comfortable and receiving payment.
Yeah, I can hear that. So as a social worker, I can hear how you have had the chance of working with people at all kinds of income levels, all kinds of financial backgrounds, and how you've experienced also your own shifting background of looking back and thinking, actually, maybe we were this, maybe we were that. That example you have as a child being like, my parents couldn't afford what Santa Claus brings is really telling that even though maybe it wasn't said out loud, it was in the air. And that's the gift and the curse of sensitivity.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that I'm pretty sure my highly sensitive nature picked something up, even if it wasn't really direct. Yeah.
And coming into the topic of sensitivity, what was your introduction to the term highly sensitive? I imagine it was in school as someone studying therapy. And what was the experience of taking that on as a way of describing your own way of being?
Yeah, I did not learn anything about high sensitivity in school. So that actually it stemmed from Instagram. And to be honest, I'm not even sure where it started. It might have been April Snow. She has a sensitive therapist account and sensitive strengths account. I think I just bumped into it a few times and it started to resonate. So then, of course, I did my own research and discovered all of Elaine Aron's work and read her books, and then continued outward after that. Like there are lots of other research studies around sensitivity in other species and sensory processing sensitivity and all of these things. And it really actually felt like a missing puzzle piece for me when I found it. At that point, I had started to do some work around like my childhood experiences and how they've impacted me, and like really looking at things from this trauma lens or this like trauma informed lens. But something still felt like it was missing, right? Not everything was adding up. And then when I added in this sensitivity piece, I'm like, okay, now it makes sense, right? Why certain things maybe really impacted me a lot. And there was the experiences I had, but then also my sensitivity is why I felt the way I felt and I struggled the way I struggled. Once I had all that information and I really did the research, like it did just settle and like land. And I think I mostly like just welcomed it in. Like it felt really validating. And at the same time, it was difficult to maybe use that language with others. I think that people knew I was sensitive. It was a little bit obvious, but to claim that as like an identity and something to be proud of was a challenge. Like it's taking me, through the years of work and my own therapy and lots of reading, exploring, journaling to really be able to embrace the strengths of it while also making space for the challenges. And I think even now, sometimes like I'll be having an experience like this is, I talk about this all the time with clients and everything, but every once in a while I have an experience and like my partner or my therapist will be like, yeah, you're highly sensitive, of course. And I'm like, oh, that's why. Yeah. And I think, yeah, I'd say my favorite part of being highly sensitive is just that feeling of like wonder. And I know I really like tap into that a lot. It's just how like the smallest moments can bring joy. And that kind of helps me ride out the waves of overwhelm or just doing the work I do. I work with people going through really tough times and feeling really deep things. And yeah, and to be able to tap into the joy as well.
And for me, it's been so interesting to learn the difference that I have with other people.
I totally get that. And I know sometimes I'm surprised too. Yeah. I'm like, what do you mean you didn't think about? Like,
yeah. And it's hard to not be like, they're so insensitive and just be like, they process the world differently because they also are likely to not get overwhelmed by like things that overwhelm me. I'm curious for your private practice. You said that you focused on sensitive healers. What was it like to realize that's what you needed to do? And how did you find those healers? How did you find the people that really were meant for your work?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was a little bit gradual, right? I think I started out in my private practice sticking with what I knew, substance use and anxiety, depression, things like that. And the more I did my work, the more I realized like I could just see it in a lot of the people around me, right? Because I was working with a lot of helpers and healers myself. And I was like, I think there might be a gap here, right? There might be a need for this. So I found people essentially by doing a deep dive into advertising, how to advertise a private practice. And I made my website, my Brave Spirit Counselling website. I put a lot of work into really trying to speak to my ideal client, really speaking to the folks, the sensitive healers. And it was a pretty easy thing to do because I know exactly what they're feeling, what they're experiencing, and what they might be looking for. So I put it all out there on my website and focused on the SEO piece. And they came. And then that kind of let it out there so that they could find me. And I found that a lot of people who did end up reach out to me, like it's ongoing. They're like, it's yes, I've been looking for you. There you are. And I put myself out there, and some people find me through Sensitive Social Worker as well. And there's actually like on the highly sensitive website, I think it's, what is it, HS Person, like Dr. Elaine Aron's website. She has a directory of like professionals who specialize in highly sensitive people. So I put myself on there too. It involves reading this book of hers. So psychotherapy in the highly sensitive person and improving outcomes for that minority of people who are the majority of clients. So she talks a lot in this book about how even though like it's like the population, like 15 to 20% of the population is highly sensitive, like her research indicated that it's close to like 50% of therapy clients are highly sensitive actually.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense because of the support needed to like process all of the information coming in. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And yeah, so I feel so lucky to have the clients I have in my private practice. Like they're fantastic and yeah, and really just kind-hearted, empathetic people trying to do meaningful work and feeling really impacted. Like I think there's this, I don't know if paradox is the right word, where as highly sensitive people, we are so good at being in that healer, helper, supporter, caregiver role, right? We're empathetic, just naturally empathetic. We pick up on the subtleties. We're really aware and conscientious and we're mindful and we think things through. And a lot of people feel really safe with us and they come to us, right? And then at the same time, we are way more susceptible to burnout. We're more easily overstimulated and we are at higher risk of burnout. And so the folks that find me, like they're grappling with those two things. And it's such a challenge as a highly sensitive person, right?
Yeah. So tell us more. Tell us more about how you support people in burnout prevention. And I know that's also a big part of Sensitive Social Worker.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of different ways I support people with the highly sensitive healers. Either depends, right? Recovering from burnout looks a little different than preventing it. But a big part of it is like understanding their sensitivity and coming to terms with it. Because to prevent burnout as a highly sensitive person, we need to take care of our needs, right? We need to have boundaries in place that support our highly sensitive needs, that lean into our sensitive strengths. And if we're constantly going against our nature and overwhelming ourselves and overstimulating ourselves, it's so much harder, right? It just takes a toll on our nervous system and we're more likely to burn out. So that's a big piece of it, is just exploring what being highly sensitive means to them, because each person's experience is a little bit different. I do a lot of work around self-worth. So the belief that we're worthy of our own care and attention, because I think a lot of the sensitive folks that I end up working with, it's not just sensitivity and being a helper. There's also a little bit of this either codependency or like this tendency to like give to everyone else, and to unlearn some of that and help them build up their own ability to look inward and to give themselves the care they give to everybody else. So that's a lot of the work too, is just this, you deserve care too, right? You're just as human as everyone else. And all that compassion and support you're giving to others, how can we start to channel some of it inward? There's a lot of work I do around boundary. That's like with sensitive social work. I have a whole course just on boundary as burnout prevention. There's lots of other aspects of burnout prevention, but that's one I dive into because it's less likely your employer is going to teach you how to set healthy boundaries with them or with your coworkers, or sometimes with the clients is a little bit easier. But so I do a lot of work around that. Like, how do we take our sensitivity into account? So make sure that we're not just looking at our time schedules, but also our energy. How can we close up energy leaks? How can we create a routine that reduces stimulation? How can we take care of our emotional boundaries and our emotional needs? That's a huge piece. Is if you're any type of helping profession, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into it. And so we need to take care of our own emotions. So I help a lot of folks like tap in, like not just how is everyone else doing, but what do I feel? And what are those emotions tell me that I need? Even if it's just like a hand on the heart and a couple deep breaths, or like a little bit of care, a little bit of compassion. And then also helping build up emotional boundaries is a big part of it. I think for me, like I didn't mention this earlier, but I actually burnt out 9 months into my very first master's of social work level role. And a big part of that was not knowing that I was neurodivergent and also not having healthy boundaries. I had these codependent relationships in my personal life, and it like trickled over into my work life. So I was like absorbing everyone else's feelings. I was taking their emotions on as if they were mine and feeling like I had to fix everything and be responsible for everybody. And through my own therapy and clinical supervision and inner work, introspection, journaling, meditation, yoga, all of those things, like I've done a lot of work on that. And now I can create that separation of, I can offer compassion and be empathetic without taking it into my heart and carrying it around as if it's mine. And so that's a lot of the work I do with my private clients and with sensitive social workers, teaching those like emotional boundary skills.
And you mentioned at the beginning that it looks different to prevent burnout versus recover from burnout. I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'd say once we're already at a point of burnout, maybe it would be helpful if I explain what burnout is. Yeah. So burnout is essentially a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So essentially, when our nervous system gets stuck in the stress response, it's activated for too long and we don't come back down into the rest and relaxation response. That can accumulate over time and get to the state of burnout. We all experience stress, but ideally we want to experience it and we come back down. And once we get to that place of burnout, it has a huge impact on our mental health and our physical health. We often have a lot of, we might need digestive issues or headaches or muscle tension. And then also a lot of people experience it as like anxiety and or depression, but really it's like exhaustion, right? It's running on empty, right? The battery's empty. And there's this sense of urgency. I got to keep going. I got to keep going. And we don't. Usually, if that's where we're at, what we need more than anything is full stop. So to start implementing new boundaries, to start all those kinds of skills that I teach people to prevent burnout are really difficult, if not impossible, to implement when you're already burnt out. Like your battery's already on empty. So to then try to establish a new boundary, we're exhausted. We are exhausted. And so generally what we need is like a real slowing down and sometimes like a full break. Like rest is the priority, essentially. Mental rest, emotional rest, to really reset the nervous system, like replenish, eating, drinking water, sleeping, and kind of cutting out the stimulation so that we can get to a bit of a baseline. Like we need at least a couple bars in that battery tank before we can start, okay, I'm going to like practice setting this terrifying new boundary that I've never tried before. So I'd say that's the major difference. And once have enough in the tank and our nervous system's had a little bit of time in the rest of the relaxation response, then we can start to do these other skills and learn how to set new boundaries and work on some of that deeper self-worth stuff.
And that's really, really helpful. Thank you. And something you've said a couple of times, which I am very new to, is reducing stimulation, right? Bringing in a routine that reduces stimulation. I feel like our world is so hyper connected. And I think about younger people like tweens and teens, and my experience of my younger nieces and nephews, that if they don't get a response immediately, they feel so out of touch. Like that's a lot of stimulation. Yeah. How is this part of the practice that you help people manage too?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like I'd say social media, we talk about that a lot. It comes up a lot. And I know for my own burnout prevention is I have a timeline of in the morning, I don't go online. And Sensitive Social Worker has a big online presence on Instagram. And I have to really be mindful about when and how I connect with that because it's so much input, right? Social media and just the internet in general, right? There's just so much input, and our brains, especially highly sensitive brains, but I don't think anyone's brains are really designed to process that much information in such a short period of time. But I also support folks in looking at just in their day-to-day. I think a lot of these helping professions, like whether you're a nurse or a teacher or a veterinarian or a social worker, is high paced. So where are the places where you can, if you have an office door, can you shut it? Or I worked with one person whose main space, like where they usually went to write their notes, they were right in this kind of through area where all the admin and everyone were checking in, like they would be the go-to person. And then they just changed locations. And then they were able to sit and focus on their notes without being as exposed to that stimulation. So we look at that. I look at that a lot, and every role is a little bit different in how much you can reduce or in what ways you can reduce it. But a lot of the times there is some ways, right? And even looking at things like lighting, right? Or background noise, if we can have even a little bit of time in our day where we can listen to some lo-fi music and just like focus in, I think it's really helpful for so many of us. I will say one thing I often talk about with burnout, one of the stressors that contributes to burnout too is like lack of reward. And that includes money, but it also includes like time off or appreciation or like feeling like there's something we're getting back. Because if we're doing really heavy work and there's no reward, there's not enough financial compensation and no time off, or like our boss doesn't acknowledge what we do, then that can definitely add to that stress and lead to burnout too.
Okay, that's really great context. The thing that I want to reiterate is for sensitives in the healing profession, taking care of our own financial needs is important. We get to prioritize that. But I hear that like if our self-worth is low or our self-worth comes from taking care of others, it can be really difficult to advocate for our own needs. I've heard clients say this, but as a sensitive, I need spas and massage, and I need all of this time off, and I need things that are expensive, because even time off it is expensive. It's time that you're not earning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So it can be, it can
Yeah.
have, there can be more financial needs in a
Mhm.
way, but then going back to how the subtle things can make us really happy, right? Like a walk in the sun has no financial needs and it is very satisfying.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that it's a really good point that, as highly sensitive people, like even for myself, right? I know I can work full time in certain environments, right? And some, like lots of folks do only work part time or they're constantly grappling with burnout, right? And there is a financial strain there. And it's something we're constantly trying to navigate, I think.
And I've interviewed a Val Nelson, who is a career coach for highly sensitives. And one of the things that she said is that highly sensitives often are entrepreneurs because we can make our own schedule. Depending on what kind of work you do, it can be well paid. There's the stress of marketing, but the flexibility of owning your time is really
Absolutely.
helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, there's different types of stress with it for sure, but I think it is suited to a lot of highly sensitive people, like that autonomy and really getting to, yeah, make a schedule that works for you.
And one of the things that we've also talked about is how, and I've heard this from other social workers, but just this idea that if we're not in it for the money, that we're sacrificing for others, this putting martyrs up on a pedestal. So to wanting to push against that in the healing profession is also something that I hear you're doing.
Absolutely. Like I am often talk about breaking down or breaking out of this like martyrdom mentality that, you're only a good helper, healer, caregiver if you're only giving and you're sacrificing everything you are and everything you have. I think that it's damaging. I don't think it's sustainable. Definitely not sustainable for highly sensitive people. And that we can do both. We can take care of ourselves and we can take care of others. And I actually believe that the more we take care of ourselves, the better equipped we are to give to others. We have, when our cup is full, right? Essentially, if we're rested and well fed and we feel fulfilled emotionally and spiritually, then the way we show up is going to be a lot different than if we're drained and exhausted and we're helping someone with something that we haven't had for ourselves in years. I think sometimes there can be even like a bit of resentment of, oh, I'm supporting my client with this, whatever it is, the self-care aspect, and then not doing it for ourselves. I guess one thought I just had around maybe the why or what comes up for some people is I think if we are working in places like homelessness or people below the poverty line, it's, for myself anyway, it's been tough because I know that like the privileges, like the things that I have, I don't deserve them any more than my clients do. And sometimes that can lead to like guilt or shame of, oh, maybe I don't deserve this or I shouldn't have this or give, 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 give. But the message I'm trying to give and trying to bring people along with me, and I'm doing my own internal work on this too, is that no, like I think what we want to be doing is lifting people up, right? Those people that don't have enough, how can we bring them up? We don't need to go down. It is okay for us to make a livable wage. It's okay for us to be able to afford our basic needs, plus that the stuff that makes life worth living, right? Do we want to have some joy in our lives? And I know I want that for my clients, and it's okay for me to want that for myself too.
Yeah, that was definitely part of my process of getting more comfortable with making more income is just saying, I want everyone to be able to live and afford what they want. And that's part of being so permeable as sensitive people too, that like other people's suffering, and there's so much suffering. There's so much suffering.
So much suffering. Yeah.
It can feel really personal, like it's our own.
Yeah. And it's our responsibility to change and fix. And yeah. And I think part of the reason I'm so passionate about burnout prevention is for sensitive folks is because I just think that they serve such an important role in our society. Like, I think that these teams, whether it's nursing or veterinarian or social work or the schools or like wherever we end up, these teams in our communities benefit from us being in those spaces. And doing this meaningful work and like caring and giving. And my thought is like, how can we keep doing that? How can we stay in those spaces? And so that's why I'm so big on boundaries and reducing overstimulation and putting in some hard lines. It's not about just taking everything back. It's what do I need to stay in the space? What do I need to keep doing this work longer?
How do we make it sustainable?
How do we make it sustainable? Exactly. Yeah.
As we were getting ready for this podcast, one of the things that you pointed out was how important it is for people to have financial stability and a livable wage as part of burnout prevention. I'd love to hear more of what you have on this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important that I personally believe like our financial wellness is like part of the big picture, right? I specialize mostly in mental and emotional wellness. But if we don't have financial wellness, really what this means is we don't have our basic needs met, right? So like a livable wage and financial stability means I have a safe place to live and I have enough food and I have clothing that's suitable for the weather and I have access to the things I need, like access to healthcare and the things I need to stay physically well so that we can show up and do whatever else we're doing. This ties into what we talked about before around how there's this kind of message out there, specifically for social workers, that we're not in it for the money. And even though, no, for most of us, it's not like our number one reason why we chose this profession, we do need money. We need our needs met. And if they're not, like, how can we possibly show up and help our clients if there's this constant baseline of, can I make my rent this month? And I talked before about how burnout is this prolonged stress over time. And if our basic needs aren't met, like we essentially go into survival mode, right? So we just have this constant buzz of stress of not okay, not safe, right? Got to make ends meet. That can absolutely lead us straight to burnout. And I think that it's harmful to assume that if we're in these roles that we don't need or we shouldn't expect to be compensated, because we deserve that just as much as anyone else. And I do notice that, like doctors, for example, they're givers, they're helpers and healers, and they show up and they do this really important work and they make a lot of money and it's just accepted. And I do believe that like mental health care should be accessible to all, but I don't think that means that the people providing it don't deserve to be compensated for their time and their energy and knowledge and expertise.
So we've talked briefly about social justice. Weaved it in and out of the conversation, especially with some of the places that you worked, like the homeless shelter, the needle exchange. And you also talked about how you lead with social justice as a social worker, right? That's why you identify first as that. How do you think about the social justice lens in your work as a therapist and your work over at Sensitive Social Worker? Like, how does it weave in there?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I would say the biggest thing is that I always look at like mental health and substance use issues in context. I think that some therapeutic trainings can really focus on the individual. And of course, like I'm in this individual relationship, which I'm really nurturing and helping the individual. But I just recognize that mental health struggles, they happen in context of the broader systems and societies that we live within. And that things like racism and classism and homophobia and transphobia and all of these things impact our mental health. And I think it's really important to be able to validate that in people's experiences and not just like brush over that or put that aside. Yeah. And a lot of people come to me and they're with a specific diagnosis from the DSM. And I'm always trying to keep that lens of and recognition that there's more at play here than just that. If someone's coming to me they have a generalized anxiety disorder, but all of their anxiety is related to their finances because they don't have enough income to pay their bills, then I know that no amount of CBT is going to resolve that anxiety for them. I think as a social worker, that social justice piece is someone's looking at the practical thing and then taking that a step further and advocating where I can within my community, within, I guess, politics and things like that. And if I'm making donations, where I'm putting that money. I think working in the public sector is one piece, right? Like I still provide some free therapy. That's really important to me. But with my own, I'm trying to find sustainable ways to grow my own income so that I'm eventually able to retire someday. But how do I do that in an ethical way? So looking at like ethical investing, is that a thing? And how do you do that? So I have a real interest in that as well.
Yeah. So bring it into all areas of your money, including your personal finance decisions. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, like, I know you asked specifically as a therapist, and it's the fact that I went there to the personal. I think it's just telling the social workers also believe the personal is political, right? So it's like, it's all connected. And I do what I can within my practice, but I feel a sense of responsibility to live my life in a socially just way as well.
That's a beautiful answer of just how, as sensitives, we think of the entire context, the entire picture. And yes, individuals can do a lot, and there are things that individuals can't do that is really up to the collective. And we can also impact the collective. So it's very permeable both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah.
As we start to wrap up, I guess the last question I want to leave you with is like, how do people engage with your work? How can people work with you as a therapist or through Sensitive Social Worker?
Absolutely. So it's very easy to find me on Instagram. So just at Sensitive Social Worker. That's probably where I'm like the most active on social media. If you don't have Instagram, I am on Facebook as well under Sensitive Social Worker. And then my websites. So Brave Spirit Counselling is just bravespirit.ca, and Sensitive Social Worker is sensitivesocialworker.com. So you can always check me out there. And I have lots of information on there about my services and what I can offer. And I'm always happy to connect with fellow highly sensitive people, especially ones who are in this much needed. Also on March 23rd, I'm going to be doing a live webinar with the Nova Scotia College of Social Workers, all about emotional resilience and healthy boundaries. So some of those emotional boundaries that I mentioned earlier and how they're so important, I'm going to be sharing some specific kind of skills and tips around that. And as long as you're a social worker, you're able to join. So I'll pass the link along to you to make sure it's included.
Well, thank you, Amy, for your time. And I'll make sure to include all of the links in the show notes.
Thanks so much.
I'm so glad to have connected with Amy and to be able to share a conversation with you. Amy's work reminds us that taking care of our financial needs allows us to keep showing up for the meaningful work we're called to do. Whether that's setting boundaries around our time and energy, advocating for livable wages, or simply acknowledging that we need to create routines that build in rest and restoration, these are important skills that everyone needs, especially those of us who identify as highly sensitive. I hope this conversation gives you permission to tend to your own needs with the same compassion you offer others, because sustainable care starts with caring for ourselves. Thank you for joining me on Highly Sensitive Money. I'm Diana Giselle Yanez, and I hope this episode helped you see how money and sensitivity can work together while honoring our interconnected well-being. We have the power to create a system where everyone's needs are met because nature is abundant. If you found value in today's conversation, please take a moment to leave a review and share this episode with someone who could benefit. Your support helps this message reach more people navigating their own financial journeys. A thank you goes to Mike Schul for the music and Juan Antonio Nunez for producing. For more resources on bringing money and social justice together, sign up for my monthly newsletter over at allthecolors.net. I also invite you to schedule a free 30-minute call where we can talk about money coaching, investment management, and all things money and social justice. Until next time, remember that your sensitivity and deep thinking is your superpower.